Welcome to Train Signal. You are watching Preparing for the DCUCI Cisco Data Center Unified Computing Systems Implementation Exam video. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about taking the exam and eventually achieving the certification, which I think has the longest name of any certification that I've ever seen. So first we'll talk a little bit about the exam, give you an overview of the exam, kind of what I see as the candidate profile for someone who would probably, look to take this. I'll give you a couple of cautions about the exam. There's always, always little words to the wise when we're talking about different exams and, how they vary with different vendors and things like that. And then the actual certification, the Cisco Data Center Unified Computing Support Specialist Certification. So again, that's a really long name. And as we'll find out, it's also a fairly complicated certification for something that you would think would be easier. Then we'll talk a little bit about recertification in the Cisco system and before and after the exam. So some things you need to know before you take the exam, some tips, and then what you can do after the exam. So with that, let's start talking about the exam itself. First, a word. So two things here, well, really one thing. Right now, as I'm doing this video, speaking to you in my time, the current exam is 642-983. This exam is valid until May 7th, 2012. There is a revision of the exam coming, 642-994. It's available in February of 2012. So everything I'm talking about, my experiences, are going to be based on 983. I have not taken 994. I'd actually be interested in taking the beta, but I wasn't invited, I guess for whatever reason. But so I haven't taken that exam yet. I have looked at the blueprints for the 994 exam. At the time of the video, the blueprints are out there. They are very, very similar. So there's really no surprises for the 994. So what will happen is when 994 comes out in February, I absolutely plan to go take that exam. And so look on my blog early on, like in the first, or I think it was the first lesson where we talk about, kind of about the instructor. I gave you some information. My blog is just jasonnash.com. And when I take that, I'll give an exam review and talk about it. And I'll especially talk about how it's different than 983. So, at that point, take a look at that. And so always a disclaimer, right? So while the course that I've gone through here was designed to help you deploy, use, and support UCS, I've also tried to make sure it covered the items in the blueprints as well. So I kind of go through and make sure those things match up. Sometimes Cisco's wording on blueprints can be a little bit fuzzy, but I've gone through and tried to make sure everything's been covered as best as I could. So hopefully there's not going to be any gaps or any areas or anything like that were missed. So let's talk a little bit about the actual exam. So the exam is about deploying, using, and supporting UCS. It's about LAN connectivity, SAN connectivity, creation of pools and profiles, and troubleshooting. It's really about implementation of UCS. There is a UCS design exam. So I've taken the design exam as well. I was actually one of the very first people to take and pass that exam for the design certification. Had to do that for a partner thing, but the exams are actually fairly similar. But you'll see that the design exam has a bit more focus on customer requirements and meeting requirements and how you deploy UCS to make sure everything is covered, whereas this one is more about actual configuration and deploying UCS. One thing that catches people off guard is that it covers other components in the Cisco data center strategy. When I say heavily, yeah, in my experience, there's a fair bit of questions on what I would call non-UCS things. Now, they're all related. We talked about that early on in the course about Cisco's data center strategy and pieces and parts and interconnection, but, it's not directly related to UCS. These are things like MDS, Nexus 5K, 7K, Catalyst, especially 1000V, the Nexus 1000V, which we've talked about. So there's a fair bit of that on there. So don't be surprised when you see that. And this course plus any real hands-on work, even with the platform emulator, should prepare you. I think you'll find that this and working in the emulator and some of that will completely prepare you for the exam. Cisco's very good about the questions in most cases. Sometimes they'll ask you things a little bit indirectly, I think is the right word. Instead of saying, how many of these can you do? They'll say, you're looking to do this and you've got 6 uplinks, or you've got these many connections. How many of these other things can you do? So it's a little bit of indirect on how they ask. So kind of watch for that. But overall, everything should be fine. What I see is the candidate profile, and this is my own opinion. Some certifications, they actually list out what they kind of expect or experience-wise. Cisco really doesn't. But the person taking this exam should be well-rounded. And by well-rounded, I mean they should include some SAN connectivity knowledge, LAN connectivity knowledge, deploying operating systems on blades with service profiles, and integrating with vSphere. So we go back to that kind of virtualized data center discussion we've had earlier in the course, and there is going to be some knowledge required of vSphere and some of the other components in the Cisco data center. So that's why I kind of say well-rounded. A couple of things that might concern people are some of these external integrations, such as Fiber Channel and VMware. So you may be someone that is all iSCSI and your Hyper-V shop, or you may not do virtualization on your UCS environment. So you got to understand that the exam is kind of in this world where it's Fiber Channel knowledge and VMware. So it's on the blueprint. You need to be aware of that. And again, information in this course should more than cover you for those pieces. So they're not going to ask you in-depth VMware questions. That's not the purpose of this exam. They're going to talk about integration points, and we've discussed that. And Fiber Channel, that's one of the reasons that I did a Fiber Channel 101 or a light 101 Fiber Channel discussion, is because I want someone who has no FC knowledge to at least be able to be prepared for the exam, and really to be able to have intelligent conversations with a storage team or a vendor implementing a storage array, but those things are kind of overlapping, so you get benefit of both. A couple of cautions about the exam, and I don't mean to, I'm not saying, no, we got to watch out for this, it's crazy stuff, but just some things to worry about. One concern I have personally about the exam is there's no indication of which version of UCS Manager they're testing you on. So there's a lot of things that have varied over the years. We can do port channels where we couldn't do port channels before. We can do SAN trunking where we couldn't do it before. Things in the GUI have moved. We now have appliance ports. We can now do boot from iSCSI. There's a lot of things that have changed from the initial release now to 2.0. And so when you take the exam, you have no idea which version of UCSM that they are testing you on. Somebody asked me that. I took the implementation exam a while back, and somebody's like, well, what version are they testing you on? I have no idea. And there are times where there can be a question that you're kind of wondering. So my suggestion is, if you're taking the older exam, don't worry about anything that's in UCSM 2.0. It absolutely predates that, and probably is around the 1112 range, which we didn't go into the details of different variations, but it's an older test. The new exam coming February, I don't know what it's going to be based on. My expectation is it's probably 2.0, but I have nothing to base that on. So just kind of keep in mind about, you don't really know which version of UCSM they're testing. And Cisco sometimes uses terms in training and exams that are not used in the actual documentation. So I've tried to use those terms where appropriate. You'll see that in places I'll talk about, hey, we call this, something here, but not, that's normally not a term you'll see in UCSM. So that's something else I want you to keep in mind. I have no way of warning you of all those little things without kind of breaking NDA and giving you too much information on exam questions, but I've tried to use that terminology here. The frustrating thing is, if I use it here, then you go pull up some UCS documentation, the terms may not be quite the same, but they're usually enough that, it's not going to completely, mess you up. But just understand that when we're talking about some things on the exam. Even I, having gone a long time without seeing UCS, the training material that I saw ages ago, when I took implementation exam a while back and all I've done is actually use UCS, I'm like, what are you asking me here? And so it's a good idea to kind of, go through this course and then kind of take the exam when those keywords and terms are still fresh in your mind. So taking the DCUCI exam by itself doesn't really get you anything. So if I go and I have no other certifications or anything like that, and I go take DCUCI and I get a 950 out of 1,000 and do a great job, I've passed the DCUCI exam, and that's about it. If you work for a partner like I do, that may meet some partner requirements, but it doesn't meet any certification requirements. The DCUCI exam is just a component of this Data Center Unified Computer Support Specialist certification. So Cisco's kind of description of that is, Cisco Data Center Unified Computing Support Specialist is designed to test a learner's knowledge of the fundamentals of the Cisco UCS and their ability to implement a virtualized data center environment. Keyword being virtualized, and here's why. So there are several components to this certification. First, you need to pass some other Cisco exams. So you can do what's called ICS&S, which is the Data Center Storage Networking Support Specialist, and the DCNIS, which is Data Center Networking Infrastructure Support Specialist. So you have to do those two. Well, you don't have to, but that's what a lot of people do. The good thing here is that preparing for those exams covers your fiber channel knowledge and the base network knowledge that you need for UCS implementation. You also have another option. So there's what's called a fast start option. And you can do this if you wish to bypass the first, these first two ICS&S and DCNIS exams. So if you've completed your Cisco CCNA certification and you've passed this qualifier exam, which is currently 642,979, you don't have to do ICS&S and DCNIS. Now, if you're starting clean without any of this, the CCNA is an absolutely great certification to have. It is a very good foundation Cisco certification. It has gotten a lot tougher over the years. I haven't taken CCNA exams in probably 10 years. I'm CCNP and I make darn sure that I renew that so I don't have to start all over. But it's a very well respected exam. If you haven't done that and you're not really on the roadmap to that, that's not a fast start option. If you already have your CCNA, it is, but if not, look at doing ICS&S and DCNIS. So, you've done ICS&S and DCNIS. Then you need to be a VMware Certified Professional. You need to have your VCP certification. So, that's not a simple task. I'm a VCP, and the gotcha on getting your VCP is you have to sit a VMware course. You cannot just go read a book or look at video training like this and go sit the VCP exam and become a VCP. It's a VMware requirement that you sit one of their official courses. Now, I'm a big, huge VMware proponent. I'm not exactly a fan of that requirement for various reasons. I fully believe in self-study. I believe that, forcing people to do that is not a great thing. I understand the thought behind it, but it limits people and limits their growth. But it's not my decision. So then you have to become VCP, and finally, when you pass the DCUCI exam, you become a Unified Computing Support Specialist. So it is a very longer process. That's why it's an interesting exam. It's one of the very few exams that actually combines other manufacturer certifications to create a single certification. I think given what we see in data centers today with the virtualization, servers, unified fabric, and everything coming together, this is going to become more and more common. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see more of this in the future. This was one of the first ones. It's been around for a while now, and it's been around a while, but nobody's really latched on yet, but I think you're going to see more of that in the future. So once you've done all that and you've got your specialist certification, you have to renew that every 2 years. So what you'll find is that on specialist certifications from Cisco, they have to be renewed every 2 years. Some of your other certs, your CCNAs, your CCNPs, some of those things are every 3 years, but for the specialist certs, it's every 2 years. So you have two options, okay? Neither of them are really good. I'll be honest with you. So you can retake all exams retired for the exam, or pass a current CCIE or CCDE written exam. Now, if you're a UCS guy and you've gone through some of the other storage and networking pieces and you're good on those, that leap to a CCIE written exam is a huge leap, okay? I have passed the CCIE route and switch written. I'm trying to get there to CCIE lab, but that's a whole different discussion. But right now, to go take a CCIE written is a big jump, because really the closest thing to what your focus would be here is probably going to be route and switch. And there's a lot of stuff on that written exam that you're not going to touch, if you are that kind of candidate profile that I laid out. Now, there's a lot of talk about Cisco offering a data center CCIE. I would love to see that. It's one reason I've held off on my route and switch certification as long as I have. If that ever comes to fruition, and I think, from this point and when I'm doing this course over the next 2 years before people will need to recertify, it probably will happen, hopefully. And then CCI data center written may absolutely be a good way to renew. The nice thing about doing a CCIE or CCDE written exam is it renews everything. So that's why I've passed my CCIE written. I'm a CCNP. I've got a number of specialist certifications, both through things I wanted to do and through partner requirements. And the only way I could do this without taking an exam every couple months to maintain and tread water with Cisco is to go past CCIE written every couple years. So depending on what your other certification load is, those big tests may make sense. But if not, you're going to have to plan ahead and retake more exams. Some study recommendations, things I suggest. Watch and study this video series. Hopefully at this point you have done that. If there's any questions you have, go back through. There's other material. Take full advantage of the Cisco UCS platform emulator. So the one thing that I hear a lot is, great, I went to a UCS class or watched the videos and they were great. I don't have UCS gear to play with. Well, you do. You've got the platform emulator. Most of what you see in the labs in this videos have been on the platform emulator. It's very powerful. It's very good. About the only thing I can't do is boot blades. So very, very good tool to have in your tool bag to use for study. If you have access to physical hardware, use that as well. If you work for a partner, like I've mentioned that I do, contact your Cisco account manager for access to the remote labs. Cisco has remote labs where you can get into full gear and actually build UCS from the initial power on of the interconnects all the way through deploying blades. It's very, very useful. But if you don't have access to that, again, fall back to PE. If you want to read more detailed information, revert to the UCS documentation on Cisco's site. This documentation has gotten a lot better. Cisco always, when they initially release a product, they have kind of skeleton documentation, as I call it. It's usually good enough to get a product stood up, usually. But it doesn't have a lot of the extras. It doesn't usually have troubleshooting guides. The documentation is bare bones. There's not a lot of explanation around why you're doing things. And over time, it evolves and gets better and better and better and better. And we're at that point with UCS. There's a lot of great documentation out there for it. So if you think that you want more information on a policy or a pool, and maybe you just want more than what I've given you in the videos, absolutely dive in there and read. And finally, this is my standard warning to everybody. Do not use brain dumps or actual exam questions to, as I quote, study. I see this. It happens. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for several reasons. One is I've actually seen some of those brain dumps, and let me tell you, they're not 100% accurate. In a lot of cases, they're not 90% accurate, and in some, they're downright humorous. The thing is, my opinion is, if I was Cisco or VMware or Microsoft or any of these guys, I would darn well have a query that runs against my database of what students got right and got wrong and what they chose. And over time, I'd be willing to bet you, and again, I have absolutely zero to base things on, but it would be interesting to see, could they pull that information back? Now, that's kind of, boogeyman in a closet kind of thing. But again, the idea here is to learn the material. If you're using those sorts of brain dumps, you're not learning material, you're memorizing material. And while that might have got you through middle school, it's not going to get you through an implementation in your data center of this equipment. So I'm going to tell you, you don't need to use those for these exams. While I have some issues with these exams on some of the questions they asked, terms that aren't really used, things like that, Cisco's not out to stump you. They're not out to trick you. So there's really no reason that if you don't know the material, you're not going to pass this exam. So my suggestion is if you feel you need to use those brain dumps, go back through the material because you're not ready for the exam. Couple of things preparing. Go ahead and schedule your exam. So, and this is absolutely true for me. If I don't have a date in the calendar, I just keep postponing things. If I have a date on the calendar, I still might postpone it, but usually that's forced due to work or personal life or something. But if I don't have a date out there, then I'm not really studying for an exam. So I will put a date out there a month in advance. That's about as far out as I go. And then it's kind of like that flag out there that I'm going to get to. Steadily study. Don't try to cram the night before. Or if you're going to cram the night before, don't wait and just cram the night before. have a steady study routine. I am under the belief that once it gets about the night before, I stop studying. I know a lot of people that kind of cram right up till they go take the exam. I can't do that. I feel that my brain needs to kind of soak information up, so I always take time to relax, usually starting the night before an exam. Have what you need. These things have changed over the years, so you need 2 forms of ID. One must have a photo, and your picture will be taken. This is a new requirement that a lot of testing through View is now doing. You'll have to have your picture taken. You'll need to have 2 forms of ID, so get there early because it does take longer to check in than it used to. And when you're taking the exam, you're given a sheet of paper to write on. I see no need for that in this exam. I've seen other people mention that they like to track how many questions they feel really confident about, so when they get near the end, they've got a good idea of how they're doing. I don't do that. That's really just whatever you want to do, but there's no math on this exam, at least on the current exam. You're not doing subnetting, you're not doing anything like that. None of the questions are hugely detailed where I got to draw out a gigantic, kind of org chart or something like that, or a, logical data center diagram. So, you're probably not going to need that. So you've taken the exam, and after the exam, if you're working for the larger certification, you're going to need to link your information to that of VMware to confirm your VCP. This may take days, or in my case, I say weeks, but now that I'm thinking about it, I believe it was literally months, because I took the design certification first. Colleague at Vera, Jeremy Waldrop, who I've mentioned, took implementation, and it took a long time because we were the very first kind of set of people to do that. It took a long time. My understanding is that's gotten better. But you will need to link them, and then one day, if you're like me, you get an email that says, hey, congratulations on your UCS implementation or design certification, and you're happy. If for some reason you do not pass, and it happens to everyone, it's happened to me, you need to wait 5 calendar days. So it's not business days as some certifications are, it is calendar days, and it starts on the day after your exam. So if you fail on a Monday, you got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then you got a spare day on Sunday to rest, and then Monday you can retake your exam. So it is 5 calendar days to wait between retakes of the exam. And that's it. So I wish you luck. It's not an overly hard certification. It's a very, I've got a few, some of my thoughts on the exam are, it is pretty high level. It's not overly detailed. I think they do that because UCS Manager is changing and it's evolving. Just kind of look at the question, make sure you understand the terms that they're using, put thought into it. I don't remember how many questions there are, and Cisco doesn't tell you because they do vary that from time to time. But when I took it, I didn't think it was too many questions. I get bored after about 45 questions on a certification exam. I was taking some that's 90 or beta exams that were 200, and I'm just bored out of my mind, but this one is not that bad. The biggest challenge to this is the overall certification hierarchy and everything you have to do really before you even take the UCS exam. And I don't think I mentioned it, but you don't have to do it in any of that order that was on my list. So you can go and you can do, the UCS exam first and then VMware and then the other stuff. It's really up to you. It's just a combination of those components make up the certification. So with that, I wish you the best of luck. And absolutely, my contact information was in the instructor's lesson, but it's just jason.nash@gmail.com. Please send me feedback on how you did on the exam, what you thought about it, especially when the new exam comes out. I'd love to hear people's opinions on that. But with that, I wish you the best of luck.